attending this event today, in person here or online through FCCT's Facebook. So today's event is about the panel discussion on Cambodia's human rights and democracy ahead of the July general election. Well, last year, I think it's the same panel. We sit here, we were sitting here, talk about the same issues about Cambodia election as well. But of course, this year there are some things that have changed. So the panel today, we will share some our observation on human rights and democracy in Cambodia and our concerns in the lead up to the election. First of all, I would like to introduce Sanhawan Sisot, ICJ's Legal Advisor, Phil Robertson's Human Rights Watch Asia Division Deputy Director, and we also have another friend, Cornelius Hanung, Forum East Asia Program Manager for ASEAN and East Asia desk. So each of us will have about 10 minutes to share our findings or concerns about human rights and democracy in Cambodia. And then at the end, we will have a Q&A session where we will answer your questions from the media as well. So I'll go first. I'll be presenting ANFREL's Cambodia Pre-Election Assessment report. So in May this year, ANFREL deployed a small team of electoral analysts to Cambodia on the ground. So we conducted about 50 interviews with different stakeholders on elections, like opposition parties, the NEC, voters, media, etc., to talk about the election and to assess what happened before the election. We did a similar assessment prior to the Commune and Sangkat Council election last year, which we did the assessment as well. Well, a lot of things remain the same, but there are also some changes which I will present in this presentation. First of all, it's about the legal framework. We saw there are some changes in the election-related legal framework. Among them include the constitutional amendments, most notably on the changes to the Article 119, which states that a political party with a majority of seats in the National Assembly, they do not have to go through the National Assembly to elect the Prime Minister. So those with the highest number of seats, they can just designate a Prime Minister they want without passing through the National Assembly. And also Article 98, they raise a quorum to table a motion of censure against a cabinet member from 30 to 42 lawmakers. While we know that the ruling CPP, they have already controlled all seats in the National Assembly, but they still have to go through these amendments to make sure they stay in power forever. So which shows that they're really not confident about their continuous victory in the future when we see the rise of the candidate party in last year's election. And just 1 month before the election, we also saw a lot of changes to the election laws. We say that the candidates in future elections must have voted in 2 previous elections. So in the next National Assembly election, the candidates must have voted in this election and also the next Commune and Sangkat Council election to be eligible to run in the election. And they also come up with some new articles to the law on the election of the member of National Assembly. We state that those who incite others not to vote or boycott the elections will have to face fines, and political parties who do to make sure no political parties or individuals would do any boycott to the election. As for the election administration, which is the National Election Committee, the NEC, it is still widely perceived as biased towards the ruling CPP. Like all stakeholders we interview say that they are pro-CPP, like they do not perceive them as an independent body. And this year, in this coming election, we will see 9.7 million voters to be able to vote in the election. And we saw more voters actually registered in this election compared to the 2018 election, simply because there's the population is growing, and also the registration period this year for this election is longer than the last election. But we have to emphasize, and this time the NEC does not receive any foreign aid, so they have to bear the full cost of the election, which is about $60 million US. As for the political landscape, I'm sure many of you are quite familiar with it. There's no improvement at all compared to the last election and also the last year local election. Intimidation, harassment against opposition and civil society members continue, and there's no room for free and fair election to take place in this election. And we also saw more and more judicial harassment against opposition leaders, which I will explain in the next slide. And also we saw a new trend in this election, which is the increasing co-optation of opposition and civil society members. So many of them are being given government position if they cross over to the ruling CPP. And the same thing, continuous exploitation of state apparatus and resources. From top to bottom, the CPP is controlling all state apparatus to ensure their victory. So on the judicial harassment against the candidate party leaders, yeah, there are lots of cases happening since the end of last year. Among them, the candidate party vice president, like Sonchai, he was fined 1 million for defamation for criticizing the last year Commune and Sangha Council election. If they continue to criticize the government and ruling party, then they will face legal actions or violent attacks. And then we also saw more and more arrests and court cases against candidate party leaders. For instance, like candidate party vice president Tak Seta, he was arrested on charges of issuing false checks, and also another advisor of the candidate party, Kong Kom, he faced the 1 million lawsuits, and also the demand for him to hand over his house back to the government. But of course, like once he complied and he returned the property, the lawsuits were dropped. And then also he also faced another lawsuits for his criticism over the CPP, and then he resigned from the party, and the lawsuits was dropped. So we saw that there's a trend in other cases as well, where there are lawsuits being filed against opposition leaders or civil society members, and then they apologize, make a video to apologize to Hun Sen, and then the case will be dropped or they'll be pardoned from prison. We also talked to many independent civil society leaders and members in the country, and most of them, they say they will just stay low profile, they won't have any high profile activities related to the election, simply because they are afraid of the attacks and intimidation from the authorities under the closed civic space. And as for election, at least 2 core members from the local election monitoring groups, they say that the genuine and independent NGOs that work on election observation, they face difficulty in recruiting their own observers. So as I mentioned earlier, the CPP-aligned NGOs, for instance, like the Union of Youth Federations of Cambodia, led by Hun Sen's son, Hun Mani, and the Cambodia Women for Peace and Development, led by Deputy Prime Minister Men Sam An, they continue to dominate the local election observation in the country, make out of at least 87 local observers. This is the trend that they started since the 2018 election, where they recruit CPP supporters to observe the election in the name of election observation. Whereas independent election observer, the COMPREL, they only plan to deploy about 2,000 observers throughout the country to observe the election. And we saw that the credible international election observers, many of them have already said they won't send any observer to observe the coming election. But there are also some other international monitors that will participate in the election. For instance, like the Association of World Election Management Bodies, the French-speaking Electoral Skills Network. These 2 are the organizations of election management bodies across the world. And also, thirdly, the Economic Community of West African States. So these 3 are the confirmed international monitors that will take part in international observation in this election. And there's also another Russian organization that are anticipated to join in the observation as well. This is the information given by the NEC during our interviews with them. So in conclusion, after considering all the factors from the election management bodies, the state of the civil society, political party participation, the media, etc. So our assessment concludes that the election will continue to fall short of free and fair election, being free and fair. So this is nothing surprising, because we have seen that the human rights and democracy situation in Cambodia has been deteriorating. So we do not expect any free and fair election to take place. But we also have to highlight that this is a similar practice. We saw there are many similarities. For instance, like the disqualification of the opposition. Like in Myanmar, they just disband the NLD, and also there's no independent election management bodies, closed civic space, oppression against the opposition parties. So we saw that they share similar practice, which just make it a sham election. And for ANFREL, we will not deploy any international election observation mission to the country, simply because we know that it is not going to be free and fair, and we do not want to take part in the election to give any legitimacy to the sham election. So you can find more information in our pre-election assessment mission report by scanning this QR code or visit our website.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Phil Robertson. I'm the Deputy Asia Director for Human Rights Watch. We're not an election monitoring organization, so I mean, it's very, very good to see and hear what ANFREL has to say, and I'm looking forward to reading their report in detail. I just wanted to cover a number of issues that we recently uncovered connected to a previous election. This past Monday, July 3rd, Human Rights Watch published a detailed report about irregularities that we found in last year's commune election, conducted in June 2022. And that last year's election was actually overseen by the same National Election Committee, or NEC, that's in place for this year's national election. That's why what we believe what happened last year is relevant in today's analysis. We looked at this, and this press release is on our website at hrw.org, so you can look at it there if you'd like. Why did we do this? Well, we were very intrigued by a sudden shift in voting patterns in Phnom Penh, which is well known as a stronghold for opposition political parties such as the now dissolved Cambodian National Rescue Party, or CNRP, as well as the current opposition party, the Candlelight Party. In the June 2022 election for communes, the Candlelight Party was permitted to run candidates after submitting the same paperwork that they did this year. The difference being that the NEC in 2023 has arbitrarily rejected the Candlelight Party's paperwork and denied them participation. And actually, that's one of the many what we would consider to be fatal blows to the legitimacy of this forthcoming July 2023 election, that the Candlelight Party has been disqualified. But in 2022, we found that Hun Sen's ruling Cambodian People's Party, or the CPP, saw its support jump in Phnom Penh by more than 60% over the previous commune election in 2017, to use to compare to other elections. And based on the NEC documents from the 2017 elections, which we reviewed, the ruling Cambodian People's Party won 690 of the 2,080 polling places that year, or 33% of 2017. But in the 2022 election, the CPP won 99.9. We had documents to examine the results. So we're like, what's going on here? And that's when we discovered the so-called 1102 forms for Phnom Penh that the NEC actually posted online on their website. They actually published the actual photos of that form. And the 1102 form, to understand what it is the form that is used to tabulate at the polling station. So you count all the votes, and then you write them down on this 1102 form, and then you send that 1102 form to the National Election Committee as the official count of that polling station. So it's a very critical form. And what our examination of those forms showed were irregularities that were shocking in both how widespread they were and how blatant. What they showed is a National Election Committee that was, at best, completely incompetent, and at worst, complicit in machinations by one party to dominate the election. Human Rights Watch review found the following irregularities. The number of votes did not correctly add up on the 1102 form in 19% of the total stations. What does that mean? That means that, like, the votes that were cast, you know, the spoiled ballots, it didn't correctly add up. The math didn't work. Corrections or correction fluid or crossed out sections were found in key sections of the 1102 forms in 15% of the polling stations. You know, like, sort of, that number is not right, let's take that out and put another number in. The 1102 form was missing the breakdown of valid votes, spoiled/invalid votes, or total votes listed underneath the vote counts in 3.5% of the polling stations. Even worse, stations. I mean, they sent in a form without the names of the parties and without the number of votes. So how did they tabulate how many votes were cast for each party in that polling station, in 3% of the polling stations? And tellingly, and this is something that will likely be repeated in the July 2023 election, independent poll monitors, as well as poll monitors from parties other than the ruling CPP, were largely shut out of the observation process and were very few and far between. Judging actually from the poll monitors who actually signed the 1102 forms, which is required, we found that in 44% of Phnom Penh polling stations, there were only CPP or government-aligned monitors present. And they were certainly not blowing the whistle on any of these irregularities. Despite the gravity of these findings, for the credibility of the NEC, we received no response. What we want is simple: an independent investigation into what happened, and a public statement on how the NEC will prevent similar irregularities from happening in the upcoming July 2023 poll. Instead, what we got was a very farcical, very typical shoot-the-messenger response from both the NEC as well as the ruling Cambodian People's Party. Things along the lines of, oh, you're outside the country. How could you know anything about this? Or, are you secretly part of the political opposition? So I must state what I feel is very obvious, that Human Rights Watch is an entirely nonpartisan organization. We do not support any political party in any country around the world where we work. That is simply not our role. We are focused entirely on getting governments, businesses, international organizations, and individuals to respect and protect human rights. We will criticize whoever violates human rights, regardless of position, party affiliation, or profile. And the unfortunate reason I must say this is the hyper-partisanship of the Cambodian government and the ruling Cambodian People's Party that now apparently construes any criticism from Human Rights Watch as an indication that we are part of the opposition. This is ludicrous. Nothing could be further from the truth. But that was the immediate response of spokespersons both from the CPP as well as the so-called Independent National Election Committee when we released our findings. So, you know, I think the writing is on the wall that we could very, very possibly see similar irregularities in the upcoming July 2023 election. Though it's possible we won't, since I expect that the only reform the NEC will take is to further diminish their transparency by not publishing the 1102 forms on their website anymore. So, you know, we may not see anything. Moving briefly to discuss the 2023 election, the disqualification of the Candlelight Party from running candidates has completely gutted the possibility of there being any sort of competitive election. Instead, what we have is the Cambodian people flicking on and off as they fly across the meadow and disappear nice when they're flashing or driving around in their caravans around Phnom Penh and other cities. And that appears to be their sole purpose, to support CPP claims that since 10 or so parties are running, this means that there is a real multi-party democracy in Cambodia. It's a charade, since the CPP has an overwhelming advantage via their domination of the media, use of state resources to support their campaign, and government repression of political opponents that my colleague from ANFREL has mentioned. what we've seen with the media, particularly, for instance, with the shutdown of the Voice of Democracy just several months ago, leaves basically one independent media operation on the ground in Cambodia. And they were basically the only ones that reported on our report that we released on Monday. The CPP is also trying now to stop a reaction by the Candlelight Party and by the overseas CNRP to boycott the election. The CPP increasingly is viewing voter turnout as a symbol of democratic legitimacy and legitimacy of the election. They want to make sure that the number of people who vote in the 2023 election is at least as many or more than the 2018 election. And so that is one of the reasons we saw this rushed through amendments to the election law, which were actually just signed by King Siamoni, I think, yesterday. And it's a telling point that criminalized now are actions that include things like advising or inciting voters to destroy or damage the ballot, causing the loss of confidence in election confidentiality. I guess we're probably guilty of that. Causing misleading actions, election. There's a whole list of things that are extremely broad and provide maximum discretion to the National Election Commission committees to determine what a violation is. Lost in this, of course, is a discussion that people should have the right to decide whether they want to go vote or not without losing rights. And that, if they want to speak out and use freedom of expression to state what they think about what people should do, that's their right as well. But that has been lost, certainly in Cambodia, as well, to be frank, in Thailand and other countries in the region. So, we have these now national election, forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Phil. Now I would like to invite Santawan from ICJ to share her insights on the human rights issue in Cambodia in the lead up to the election.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Santawan Sisot. I'm a legal advisor at the International Commission of Jurists, or the ICJ. On behalf of the ICJ, we are delighted to have this opportunity to discuss the rule of law and human rights situation in Cambodia ahead of the general elections. Indeed, we agree with the assessment made by the two colleagues here that we are afraid that the upcoming election will fall short of being free and fair. And we believe that this stems from several factors in the midst of the overall context of the poor human rights record, the human rights situation in the country, and democratic deficit within Cambodia system. We believe that these factors include the lack of independence and impartiality of the National Election Committee, or the NCE, the lack of independence and accountability of justice actors, the limited presence of free media outlets in the country, the shrinking civic space, civil societies, and ongoing violence and crackdown against perceived political opponents in countries. We believe that these factors the lack of these factors significantly undermine the civic and political space necessary for holding a free and fair elections. And it's also demonstrate a systematic disregard of political participations and freedom of association that just occurred this year. And it demonstrates how it serves as a demonstration of a systematic disregard of Cambodia international legal obligation as well. The first incident is the revocation of the VOD license, the Voice of Democracy license, without due process, and just happened this year, February this year, and it was done, and the revocation indeed further contribute to the decline of free expression and freedom of the press in the country. So without saying, an independent media is crucial for free and fair elections. And the closure of VOD indeed has an immediate impact on the national elections. And when I say the closure was done without due process. Indeed, we didn't even know exactly the law that used as a basic of its closure, but we believe that is the sub-degree on organizing and function of the Ministry of Information. However, it's still unclear. But what is clear to us is that the revocation process was carried out in a process that lack of transparency. There's no avenue to appeal the decisions, and the process grants sole authority to Ministry of Information to allow or revoke any license of media, and the way they were carried out indeed is incompatible with international law and standard. And if you look at the reason that was used for the revocation, it was the new report about the Prime Minister's son. So this further highlight how the media in Cambodia lack independence and the politicizations within the countries. And indeed, it's not just VOD or the media outlets who face crackdown. The human rights defender, political oppositions like Long Shun already talked about, they are facing the same situations. And sadly, indeed, there's some similarities between these two because they were carried out through the law that are not compliant with international law and standard. And it's been there for a very long time. These law, like for example, the one that used to revoke the license, they are vague, they are overboard. It gives a lot of authority, a lot of power to the authority to use that discretion power, to revoke or to do anything. And there are several other laws as well that impose criminal punishment against violator, which indeed incompatible with the principle under international human rights law and standard. For example, there are several provisions under the Criminal Code of Cambodia, like those criminalize plotting, those that criminalize the disclosure of false information, those criminalize the incitement to commit felonies or disturb social security, or less majestic provisions. These are incompatible with international human rights obligations that Cambodia is a party to, and has been used against political oppositions, like Long Shun already talked about. So I think that's one of the very concerning issue that we always try to raise it. The second incident would like to talk about is the verdict against the opposition leader, the former opposition leader, Kem Sokha, which announced March this year. And indeed it served as another demonstration of the politicization and lack of independence of the judicial system in Cambodia. So the revocations, indeed we're very concerned about the verdict, because the verdict was announced amidst the numerous violation of the right to a fair trial. In this case, there's a lot of unsolved evidence that used as a basic for the convictions, and there's a lot of fair trial issues in the case. Not just this case, indeed the case of Kem Sokha came when there's a lot of senior candidate party hit by lawsuit as well, which through the climate of fear ahead of national elections. And lack of independence within Cambodia judiciary and the judicial system is not new. It's a persistent problem in the countries. There's a lot of judges who openly align themselves with the ruling party, CPP, which of course results in a serious compromise of their independence. For example, is the president of the Supreme Court. He is reportedly hold a membership in the CPP, and his son occupying a high-ranking governmental positions. And such a situation is deeply concerning, because that means the court and justice system can be used and utilized as a tool against perceived political opponents. And it's even more concerning if you look at the fair trial right issues within the Cambodian court. There's a lot of cases when we found that the Cambodian court have a high reliance on control in case involving political oppositions or human rights defender in the country as well. The last incident we'd like to talk about is the two things that the two colleagues already talked about: the rejection of the registration of political parties, the candlelight parties, and Khmer United Great Nation in May this year. As highlighted by the UN expert, right after the rejection. The UN experts say the NEC modality appear to have discriminate against certain political party, and it also seems like the government is ready to use all the repressive measure to eliminate their oppositions, even in a manner that restrict the right to political participation of the member of that political parties. And also this occur, interestingly, against the backdrop of threats of violence that made by the Prime Minister himself. Like since the beginning of the year, he talked on social media, live stream on Facebook about, tell his opposition to pick between the bad or the legal system, or say he gonna be like the CPP gonna beat them up, they're gonna send people to their present home. Of course, it end up with what you already know, the oversight board, the meta powerful actor like the Prime Minister himself. Of course, he's incitement of violence. He's whatever he say, that's a strong risk that people will act upon. And indeed, people act upon that because Human Rights Watch documented that after the speech were made, there's a series of acts of violence targeting opposition party members and activists, apart from all the crackdown, the lawsuit that used against them. So I would like to end my presentation just to echo the recommendations that NGO communities make for continuous make all the time, which is it is very important for international communities, everyone, NGO as well, media, to send a clear message to Cambodia that they should stop this and respect freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and right to political participation of the people. For the diplomats, it's important for them to link in the future economic and political engagement with compliance with international human rights obligation of Cambodia as well. And we think it's important to keep calling the judiciary, the Cambodian judiciary, to overturn the convictions made based on unsubstantiated charge against human rights defender, political opponents, and also immediately release those who were detained under these charges. So I think that's all for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sanhawan, for sharing ICJ's insights and recommendations. Now I would like to invite Forums Asia Program Manager Cornelius Hanung to the stage. He will be joining online. Yeah, hi Hanung. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Hello, hi Chunglun. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm really sorry I cannot be there in person at the moment. My name is Hanung. I'm the program manager for East Asia and ASEAN of Forum Asia. And thank you for the organizer for inviting Forum Asia to be part of the panel, and congratulations for ANFREL for the analysis, which is very resonant on what's happening and then what we are concerned at the moment. Forum Asia shares the same concern as have been mentioned by the previous speakers from Human Rights Watch and ICJ with regards to the upcoming election in Cambodia, as we are facing a region that somehow does not have regards to the voices of international community and the local civil societies as well, demanding a free and fair elections. And what has been happening, as colleagues from ANFREL has been mentioning as well, is an indication on how the civic space in Cambodia are getting shrinking and then nearing to a closed civic space. And there have been a precursor of several violations that have been happening this past month, and we're afraid that this will only be amplified within the upcoming weeks leading to the elections. First, of course, as we might have noticed on the decision to bar the candlelight party by the Cambodia's national election committees from contesting in the upcoming general election, citing a failure to fulfill documentation, including the missing original paperwork, proving its registrations with the Ministry of Interior. So this is something that we cited as a procedural harassment, as I want to say that, and the disqualifications based on this failure to producing original document is actually quite contradict that the fact that CP was allowed to participate in the previous local election in May 2022, and then back then CP only produced a copy of its registration to the Ministry of Interior. And what changed, and then what makes the situation change, and now they couldn't run for the elections. But then on the 25th May 2023, Cambodia's Constitutional Council ruled that the National Election Committee's decision to bar Candlelight Party from running in the July election was valid, and thus rejected an appeal against its disqualifications. And then the second is the refusal also come as a sequence of events with the closure of the Voice of Democracy, one of the Cambodia's few remaining independent media organization, in February 2023, as well as the sentencing of former CNRP leader Kem Sokha to 27 years of house arrest in March 2023, which indicating there is a certain systemic attack against the oppositions leading to the elections. And then the third was also, as the colleague from ICJ mentioned, was the decision made by the Facebook Oversight Board. As we might have known, in January 2023, the Prime Minister used his Facebook page to post a potentially violent speech in which he directly addressed his political opponents, threatening with violent tone against some opposition's personals. And then the video was reported for violating Meta's violence and incitement community standards, but moderators decided to keep the video online, citing its newsworthiness allowance, which allows such content since its public interest value, it says, overweighing risk of possible harm. However, on the 29th of June, the Oversight Board issued a decision that Hun Sen's video contained unequivocal statements of intent to commit violence against political opponents. And it was claimed, the decision of Facebook Oversight Board claimed that Meta was wrong to apply the newsworthiness allowance standard in this case, as the harm caused by the keeping the video on the platform outweighed its public interest value. Based on the recommendation as well, they made a recommendation to suspend Cambodian Prime Minister's Facebook and Instagram account for 6 months for violating this. But this was responded just yesterday as a report Oversight Board of Facebook and barred them from entering Cambodia for an undefined period. And we also noted that on the 23rd of June 2023, the National Assembly approved an amendment to the election law, as mentioned in the ANFREL's report as well, prohibiting those who don't vote in the upcoming election from running as candidates in the future ballot, including communal council election and general elections. And these we've seen as a way to suppress the non-voters movement on the upcoming election and the opposition as well. So the Sri Lankan civic space in Cambodia in consumer rights defenders working in various issues in labor rights, environmental rights, and indigenous people's rights as well in the course of 1 year. And of course, the numbers might be more because that focusing on the peace building and conflict resolution in Asia to cancel conference, citing the reason that this would violate the internal affairs of ASEAN member states. Again, this is an indication how documents in ASEAN has been used by its member states, citing a non-interference as a shield. And we're also alarmed on the potential increase of surveillance after the Cambodian Prime Minister's awarded a certain amount of money to local brand licensing and wholesaling conglomerates in March for investing in the government official facial recognition projects, which from the civil society perspective might be used as well as a surveillance technique to even further shrink the civic space that is already closed at the moment. So what does this indicate? Because what has been happening in Cambodia shows a significant deviation from what has been recommended by international community as well. For example, by the United Nations Special Rapporteurs on the situation of human rights in Cambodia, who introduced 20 benchmarks to help promote human rights implementation in the country. And one of them is the benchmark to restore and re-enfranchise a variety of political parties and ensure free and fair elections. And this is also basically a bridge of ASEAN vision that envision people of ASEAN to enjoy their rights to also participate actively without fear and reprisals on decision-making process, including elections. So Forum Asia believe that democratic elections necessitate open, inclusive, and credible political competitions, and as well as the freedom of the citizens to choose their representative. And within the current shrinking civic space and the continuous oppressions conducted by the government, we are in the positions that holding a free and fair elections will be virtually impossible at this point. But in a way, we are facing a regime that it does not show any compliance to the international human rights standards and also to the regional standard of ASEAN. And the question is if we are letting Cambodia get away with this, and what about the precedents that will be happening in other countries in ASEAN, for example, in Myanmar, and what will be the accountability mechanisms that are available for reaching this internationally and regionally recognized human rights standards? I'll stop there and we'll be
Discussion earlier, like we saw there's a flawed legal framework on election that is not up to international standards. A biased NEC, the disqualification of the candidate party, which is disproportionate. The suppression against media, CSO, political parties. There's no fair coverage of media. In fact, there's not many independent media left. There's no meaningful participation of the people in the election. So there's no doubt that this is not democracy at all. Like, we should not pretend that Cambodia is still a democracy. It is a one-party dictatorship, and we should just call a spade a spade. So now I will open the floor for questions. Please introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and direct the questions to either one of the any of the panels.
Hi, I'm Chalanthorn from Thai PBS World. My question is to Kun Sanhawan. Currently, as ICJ is one of the organizations that send complaint to Meta Oversight Board, and currently the board is already banned from entering Cambodia. How ICJ see the in terms of restrictions of freedom of communication in Cambodia, and especially when Hun Sen moved to other platforms like TikTok, the platform that we cannot follow on legal terms, that even you send complaint, the Telegram and so on and so forth, maybe cannot follow up on that. How ICJ first see the using of like similar ways to track the use of the platform by Hun Sen, and how difficult it is, and how will it affect in terms of political spinning, environmental and human rights pressures in Cambodia?
No, on that, along with some other NGOs. But yeah, indeed, in the public comment we send, we talk about international law and standard. We talk about how Meta should look into this issue. And we talk about how his incitement to violate international law and standard. So in response to your questions, indeed, interesting. I start to see several people in Cambodia start to shift to Telegram. It's like from Facebook to Telegram. But of course, it will affect it. It kind of a bit affected the election campaign, because the decision of the oversight board came just now, just a few weeks before the election. As you know, there's a lot of Cambodian on Facebook, and Facebook indeed one of the most popular platform for the people in Cambodia. So yeah, but TikTok is also, I understand that they're getting more and more popular as well in the countries. So the fact that he shift from Facebook to Telegram, I understand that there'll be more people on this platform, because you can see like the media outlets start to operate on those platforms as well, and but I still think that many Cambodians will still stick with Facebook and using Facebook, and later after 6 months I think Hun Sen might come back. I'm not sure what your assessment, but he might come back on Facebook too.
Just to add a few things. I mean, the thing about Facebook is it's basically the social media town square for Cambodia. That's where everybody is. Ordinary people use it all the time. Share photos of family. They advertise their businesses. This is where what is happening on social media in Cambodia happens. So it will be interesting to see how many people go to Telegram to follow Hun Sen. I don't think it's going to be anything like the kind of support that he has, but I mean, this is social media, and it's, as human rights advocates who believe in privacy concerns and believe in freedom of expression, and also preventing real world harm through incitement of violence, it's also up to us to chase the likes of TikTok and Telegram and others and demand that they actually have some respect for international human rights standards, and we'll do that. Whether we succeed or not, I'm not sure. But what I will say is that the action by the oversight board from Facebook was very well in that speech that Hun Sen gave. But we also showed that there was actual real-world harm that was occurring. We documented that there were, for instance, motorcycle attacks against Candlelight Party officials, where men on motorcycles with wraparound helmets with metal bars were attacking Candlelight Party activists in Phnom Penh and beating them, jumping off the motorcycle and beating them senseless. And we demonstrated that was actually happening. And that kind of real world harm also, I think, input into the decision by the oversight board that, this was not just theoretical, but this was once again what we've seen in previous elections, which is that Hun Sen incites violence against political opponents and mysterious men suddenly appear and carry it out. I'm very happy that those attacks diminished within a couple weeks after we published our report on April 24th. But the fact that we had to publish it all indicates very clearly that we're dealing with a thuggish one-party state that doesn't respect human rights.
Is there any other questions? Please.
I'm Zoe Ford from ABC Australia. I'd like to know what the panel thinks the international community should be doing in response. It's one thing to not send observers. We also see a lot of statements of deep concern from various countries, including Australia, with regimes like this. But what other practical steps could you see countries like Australia taking in response to what Cambodia does to silence critics, to remove opposition parties, and so on?
Well, yeah, maybe I'll take the question. Well, thank you for the question. First of all, we recommend that international observers should not send any observation mission to these coming elections, simply because we already know the result, we know the outcome. So there is no point to go and give the legitimacy to the election. And secondly, while the international election observers are not observing the election, the local observers, the independent observers, they are still doing their work on the ground. And I think we should lend our support to them and solidarity as well. First is by supporting their activity even after the election, because we know that the situation is just going worse and worse from the last election to this election. And then we know in the future, they have already amended the election laws that in future election, their opposition parties face a higher barrier to join the election. So there won't be any space for democratic election to take place. So we should support their work to continue promote human rights and democracy in the country. My colleagues, do you have any additional comments for Hanung?
I think exactly like what I say at the end of the presentation. I think we have to send a clear message to the government in other countries that for any future engagement, compliance with international human rights obligations should be one of the conditions. I understand that Cambodia got some dialogue of bilateral treaty or something like that. I think it's very important that international human rights obligation, the compliance of international human rights obligation should be set as one condition.
What I would say to start with, specific to Australia, is that Australia actually has to find its voice to actually even condemn something. I mean, the silence has been deafening from Canberra about Cambodia, not just in the recent several months, but going back a couple years. And the problem, frankly, is that when you look around, even to the public, that if you look at what the other international governments are saying, Australia is always sort of last and least. And that is unfortunate because, Australia says that it is part of the region, that it has a unique perspective, but it continues to punch way below its weight. And frankly, I would expect that we would see some sort of public statements about the things that we've identified, about the violence against activists, against the opposition political parties, the shutdowns of NGOs, the shutdowns of Voice Democracy. We don't. I would expect that we would see, some sort of demand for an investigation into the irregularities that we found from last year. This is last year's election. It's already settled. It's not even that something they should be able to say something, but they don't. In terms of recommendations, I think that as a result of this election, which will not be free or fair, we can't say that Hun Sen is a democratic leader. Should not be received by other countries as a democratic leader. We should not play the charade game that Hun Sen has set up through this election. And I do think that there needs to be real-world consequences. We've continually pressed for the European Union to take another look at the everything but arms trade preferences, given the fact that we haven't seen any progress on human rights and labor rights conditionality after the first 20% were taken away. Desperate move to somehow improve trade-related measures for GSP, if it ever, of course, passes the Congress. And, we've continually called for targeted economic sanctions against the police and the military people who have backed Hun Sen and who have committed violence over the years. And we did a comprehensive report that met with basically silence from the international community. So, it seems in some ways like the international community has either decided that Cambodia is too hard democracy, they want respect for human rights, and they were promised that through the Paris Peace Accords. And, the fact that, 30 years on from the Paris Peace Accords, we're basically betraying that promise is pretty fundamentally problematic.
I don't have a question. I would like to share some comments if that's okay. I work for the Siam Commercial Bank, or worked till December of last year. I'm currently the chairman of its 100% owned subsidiary bank, Cambodia Commercial Bank. And I have been, basically the Cambodian operations were reporting to me directly, indirectly, effectively, absolutely needed. And hopefully one day their voice will become effective. The fact of the matter is the world is becoming more and more autocratic. The so-called policeman of the world has decided he doesn't want to be the policeman of the world anymore, or he is going to be a policeman on a selective basis. And I remember this interview by the Singapore Prime Minister 3-4 years ago, when he was asked this question in relation to the Philippines and what ASEAN was intending to do when Marcos's predecessor was ruling the country. And he said, where do you want me to draw the line? Look at Philippines, look at Cambodia, look at Myanmar, look at Thailand. Where do we draw the line? And so, whether we like it or not, the Indian Prime Minister just got a state visit by the US government and asked the journalists in India, if they write against the government, what treatment they get. So we are, whether we like it or not, there is nobody left to control or check. And so the world is becoming more and more autocratic. Now, I'm also the chairman of Siam Commercial Bank, Myanmar. So I have the benefit of comparing Myanmar and Cambodia. And I can tell you, one thing you have to hand over to Mr. Hun Sen. For a country which was shattered by whatever happened in the country, he has delivered prosperity to his people. The Cambodians, when you see them, the man on the street, and his well-being and the prosperity that you see in that country, I don't think the average Cambodian hates Hun Sen. In Myanmar, the average Burmese person hates the military. They have shot people and they continue to shoot them. I don't think Hun Sen has shot anyone. So I think it's more a question, these are the times we are living in. Look at the Turkey elections. You know, there was a great opportunity for a change, but didn't happen. So whether we like it or not, and I repeat, I think organizations like these are absolutely essential, and hopefully their voices will become more effective. But we are living in a world where autocracy is only going to increase. You know, Thailand wouldn't have had this government 8 years ago if genuine democracy had prevailed. So the shades may differ, but the result is the same. Thank you.
Well, thanks for your comment. Any other questions?
Hi, I'm Pierre Prakash from International Crisis Group. Thank you very much to the panelists for a very interesting conversation. I have a question maybe for the panelists from Forum Asia, because you also deal with ASEAN. I'm just wondering whether you think ASEAN, if there is any hope that ASEAN has a role to play here, considering that ASEAN's relevance and I would say, international relevance is presently in serious jeopardy with the Myanmar situation. And so this obviously does not, what's happening in Cambodia does not reflect well on the region. Do you think there's any hope that ASEAN has a role to play here? And let's just keep it at that. Has a role to play here, or at least can be vocal, or does the sort of non-interference principle mean that there is no hope to be made with ASEAN? Thank you.
Should I just respond now? Okay. I mean, in the history, there are precedents where ASEAN countries tend to listen more from other countries within the regional bloc. But in our assessment at the moment, ASEAN cannot do any conflict resolution by its own. That's also proof that's what's happening in Myanmar as well. So if you are thinking on putting ASEAN in the picture on solving what's currently happening in Cambodia as well, ASEAN cannot do anything by its own. So ASEAN needs to do in conjunction with the international human rights mechanisms and other diplomatic pressures. Otherwise, what's also been happening is many countries are now using ASEAN as a shield of non-interference, non-consensus. And so the hope, personally, I would like hope on ASEAN, but of course they cannot do it by its own. Needs to be in conjunction with the efforts of the international human rights mechanism at the UN.
Can I say just a few words? That, I mean, unfortunately, ASEAN is not equal to the sum of its parts. The problem, frankly, is that because ASEAN has not really moved forward in terms of having any sort of intervention mechanism, even worst case scenarios like Myanmar are not getting the kind of attention they need. And so Cambodia, which seems to be stable and at peace, will ultimately not get anything except praise for holding an election. And that is the way that ASEAN plays now. And unfortunately, what we've seen is the international community is increasingly distracted. With Myanmar, the discussion is ASEAN centrality. Let the local guys fix it. And the same response I think would be seen in terms of what's going on in Cambodia. There's just no appetite within ASEAN to do anything but what they're already doing, which is holding meetings and building linkages and flying here and there, and having big summits where they invite the world. Much of the world turns up. They don't raise human rights issues the way they should. And everybody pats themselves on the back and goes home. I think what we need to have is a reconstitution of some sort of international Friends of Cambodia that is prepared to really say what needs to be said on Cambodia. That would support the efforts by the Special Rapporteur, Vitit Muntabon, to speak up. That would back the OHCHR Cambodia office to be more vocal. That would encourage the abuses that are apparent to everyone. I mean, the fact that we have to wait for, the Meta Oversight Board to appear in the sky and sort of violence happening year in, year out. We've seen the imprisonment of these various different opposition activists and civil society people. We've seen the shuttering of the media organizations. We've seen the attacks on the NGOs. This is not something that has been done in the dark. It's been done in plain view. And the international community has just twiddled their thumbs and allowed it to happen. And that cannot continue. If there's any lesson that comes out of what this election is that there has to be a redoubled effort to tackle Cambodia as it is, which is that it is a country that has ratified every single human rights treaty on the face of the planet and implements none.
Well, due to the time constraint, we will take one more question from the.
Good morning, Aaron Fernandez from SBS News Australia. I just wanted to come back to my colleague from Siam Commercial Bank's comments. Do you agree with that characterisation that as human rights and democracy have declined in Cambodia, that the country is getting richer, and how difficult does that make it, or how do you promote these issues that we're here to discuss this morning? How do you prosecute those arguments within Cambodia if people are looking around and saying, well, poverty alleviation is happening, I'm happy to look the other way on these issues?
Can respond a bit and Phil can add it in.
I'm happy. It's up to you guys. I'm happy to respond to.
I'm down because there's a lot of economic policies implemented by Hun Sen that are under questions. For example, there's a lot of special economic zone. If you look closely, the way Cambodia frame it is different from, for example, the way Thailand frame it. I mean, in Thailand, the government still have a hold, the grab of it. But in Cambodia, they give a lot of power to the zone developer, which is mostly sometimes Chinese investor. And you end up in a situation like in Sihanoukville, special economic zones, when they do high Cambodian, but there's also a lot of Chinese worker there as well, and there's a lot of report of labor right abuse, committed in the zone. And I think there's many of the development projects in Cambodia came with the record of violation of the allegation of forced evictions without adequate compensations to the local communities, without adequate support on their livelihood, without adequate resettlement package, and also a record of the lack of EIA, the problem of environmental degradations as a result of these mega projects, So they do have a lot of economic policies, let's say that. But I don't think they are always compliance with human rights and not always respect the human rights of their own citizens.
Yeah, I would say a couple things here. I mean, what we have seen is a widening wealth gap within Cambodia. You know, where you have, you know, these massive weddings that you can see on social media. You have, you know, people driving Bentleys through Phnom Penh Street. And that is against, you know, a backdrop of increased poverty in the region, in the sense of like sustained inability to basically improve their conditions. You have massive amounts of microfinance debt. You know, if you look at across the world in terms of level of indebtedness based on microfinance, Cambodia's got the highest. You know, someone gets sick, you know, they don't have a social safety net, they need to borrow money. You know, they want to improve their rice planting, they need money for inputs, they borrow money. And the immediate result has been an increased pace of migration of youth out of Cambodia, not just to Thailand, but across the region, in some places, the Middle East as well, with migrant domestic workers going. So we're seeing, you know, families taking desperate measures. The problem, frankly, is that, you know, there's talk about, okay, the rising tide raises all boats, you know, in terms of greater GDP, exports, and things like that. And certainly the size of the economy has expanded. But what you have is people being left behind. And I'm very afraid of what's going to happen connected to the environmental situation in Cambodia. Because what we're seeing now, through the dams on the Mekong and the reduced flows of water down the Mekong, is the potential at some point in the near future that the seasonal reversal of water back into the Tonle Sap, the Great Lake, will not occur. And what happens is when that water reverses into the lake overspreads its banks. Basically, it floods all the jungle around the banks of the Tonle Sap and creates one of the richest freshwater fisheries in the world. You know, the fish benefit from the things being dropped from the jungle into the water, and that is the richness of those fisheries. And if it doesn't reverse, the fish that 70% of the Cambodian people's protein comes from will not be there. Cambodia, for ordinary Cambodians. Not just what, you know, appears in the GDP statements or, you know, the amount of garments and bicycles and other things that are being exported. Because the reality is that if you ask Cambodian people, are they doing better or worse than where they were a number of years ago, the answer is not necessarily better. In many cases, it's like, I've got more debt, I've got more problems, and, you know, I've sent my son and daughter to go work in Thailand.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. This question is to Phil. My name is Imtiaz Muqbil. I'm a local journalist. Phil, you raised two issues that I'd like to just ask you to follow up on. One is the issue of corruption among the political parties. What guarantee is there that even if you had a free and fair election, that you would get a more honest, clean bunch of politicians coming into power? Would it not effectively replace one set of corrupt politicians with another? That's question one. The second question is on the issue of, you mentioned the deafening silence of the Australians particularly and the international community. Again, hasn't the so-called international community become a victim of its own double standards? Because you're seeing these same different strokes for different folks being applied at the international level everywhere. The gentleman from Siam Commercial Bank raised the issue of India. You're seeing the same thing in the Middle East with the Palestinian-Israeli situation. So you can't have a situation where the international community has got any moral right to come and tell these people anything about on any issue when they really have a very clear different strokes for different folks policy. And frankly, the rule of law doesn't quite work that way unless it's uniformly applied across the world. So on both sides, whether it's a domestic issue of one set of corrupt politicians being replaced by another, or the international community losing its moral right to have to take any kind of stand on these global issues. Frankly, it looks like a bit of a dead end, and I was just wondering if you have a comment on that.
Well, you know, the whole double standards argument is frequently used by diplomats who don't want to do anything. You know, like, oh, geez, we have other problems, other places. Oh, yeah, we can't do this. We can't say something here because it might be construed as such and such a problem. The bottom line, okay, is that governments around the world ratified the international UN human rights instruments. They weren't passed by you and me. They were passed by governments. They were ratified by governments. They signed up to by governments. And so, you know, the calling for governments to comply with what they've signed up to shouldn't be revolutionary, and it shouldn't be a matter of like double standards. I mean, I would argue, of course, that we should be tougher on Modi in India, and that they're getting away with a lot. But at the same time, the fact that some governments aren't strong on India doesn't give a justification to say we should let Cambodia have a free ride too. That's a slippery slope to not caring about anything. And, you know, I'm sorry, I didn't sign up for that. You know, the bottom line is that the international human rights agenda applies equally to all. And it's up to us and others to demand that governments be fair in applying that. But at the same time, the fact that some governments have interests with some governments that they don't want to raise something doesn't mean that everybody else should get a free ride. You know, I mean, that becomes a sort of partial sort of focus on, you know, geez, we won't call out this government because they're an ally, but we'll spend all our time excoriating another government. We have to basically work on everything. And that's what we should insist on. And that's what we insist on governments doing. And if they don't do that, then we'll criticize them. You know, criticize them that say the double standard is that you guys giving these guys a free ride. But we don't want to have it go the other way, that say give everybody a free ride. You know, and I think that's the big thing. I mean, as I said, Cambodia has ratified every international human rights treaty you can imagine. Their record of ratification is a thing of wonder. Their record of implementation is a thing of despair. I'm sorry, what was the first question?
Corruption.
Oh, well, I mean, it's the same. Well, let's try it and find out. I mean, the reality is that when you had the 2017 commune elections, which were broadly recognized as free and fair, but I'll defer to my colleagues from ANFREL about that, and when you had a significant number of communes being taken over by the then Cambodian National Rescue Party, the idea was somehow that, okay, we're going to see something and something was going to change. And, you know, local people started bringing their complaints and their issues to those commune councilors. And some of the commune councilors started to work and some of them didn't. Everybody knew who was doing and who wasn't. But that experiment had ended, you know, really within, you know, the commune elections was in June, and by November, the party was dissolved. So how do we even know whether one is going to be better or not? I mean, the sort of cynical explanation that all political parties are corrupt, you know, I don't buy that.
All right. Yeah, because of the time, so we have to conclude this panel discussion today. Well, the election is coming up on 23rd of July, which is like less than 3 weeks. So I urge everyone to pay close attention to the election and voice out any concerns that you may have during the election. Of course, like, we will continue to closely monitor the election as well from outside Cambodia. And after the election, the FCCT will hold another panel discussion. Maybe Phil, you want to?
Yes.
talk
Just
about
a
that?
quick,
Yeah.
I hope we don't get quoted in the press or something. I don't want to see my names in newspapers.
Yeah, don't give anybody your name then. So, yes, thank you for that reminder. On the 26th of July, which is 3 days after the election, which will be on the 23rd, right?
Yes.
Yeah. The FCCT will hold a panel session that is sponsored by the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand to discuss what happened. That panel discussion will be at 7 p.m. on the 26th of July. I think our colleagues from ANFREL will be there, as well as other guests. And so you're certainly welcome to come back to see what happened on the 26th if you have time.
All right, thank you so much for your participation today. We look forward to meeting you again on 26th. Yeah. Have a good day.
Kinda? Okay. Yeah, we want you guys to come. Not on the. Okay,
เขาทำ Facebook ไง
Huh?